Hello and welcome to the Zach Thinks Your podcast. I'm your host, Zach. I'm your favorite recovering man-child and mental load coach, and I teach people how to better understand invisible labor. In this episode, it's going to be a little bit different. My friend Lori Sugarman Lee, who is also a Fair Play facilitator with me, we hosted a free workshop because we wanted to post it as a podcast episode here. We did a ERG workshop for a company recently, and we thought that people might want to sort of have the same experience, but in podcast form. Just one, if you are interested in hiring me and or Lori to do this workshop within your organization, we would be happy to. As this show is going to be airing in late spring, early summer, this is going to be in the middle of my paternity leave, so something maybe for the fall or the winter coming up. But this episode, I wanted to showcase what this workshop looks like in real time with a couple of different strangers. We do this work for corporate organizations, but I hope this gives you a good idea about it. You can fill out an inquiry form if you are interested in having us, I think, and or reaching out to us on LinkedIn. I know Lori is the one that tends to field those kind of requests a little bit more. So I hope that you enjoy this. This workshop is going to be about invisible labor, a really simple workshop that the two of us broke down for a couple different people and how we would do it in a corporate organization. We go through a couple basic definitions, some examples, and then we aim, and I think the juiciest part of this workshop and its potential is when you have like a small group community of people on a team or in a small organization that are then willing to say, oh, here's where I add invisible labor to somebody else. And it can get really kind of juicy and vulnerable. So I thought we did a pretty good job having that experience with a couple of strangers. I hope you enjoy this experience. And again, this is meant to be informational. So if, as you're listening to this, like this could be the workshop that shows up in your place of work, or if you find this episode in itself useful, you can just share it with people in your workplace. So I'll unload it and we're going to go straight into the workshop. Hello, Jessica. Hello, Lolo. I'll probably repeat myself a couple times, but you're absolutely welcome to be on camera. A huge part of this exercise is to be a little bit of a run through for if we were to do it for corporate organizations. So there'll be a couple moments where we'll kind of break the fourth wall and point out how things would go differently if we were doing it for your organization versus, right here live. But Lori and I had a lot of fun a couple weeks ago doing this for an organization where we thought, it'd be fun to kind of do this for some other folks and or see if there's other people that would want, like, just show them specifically what we do for folks and see if they would want to have us come do it in their teams, in their organizations. Normally people introduce us. Lori, honestly, I didn't think this one through. I'm going to introduce you and maybe you can introduce me after.
We're going to need an extra half an hour.
One of my Fair Play facilitator friends, we've coached multiple couples together on either side. She is a published author, fantastic. Our Home book has been one of my favorites to introduce to folks, especially that have young children that are trying to create sort of a side door to talking about domestic labor with their parents. But Lori's been featured in a couple different things. I remember the first time I ever heard about you, Lori, was you were saying, why are all the women organizing the father-daughter dance? So Lori's been a great advocate for this work. I think she brings a lot of great content to it online as she works with her teenage sons to bring it to life and to have them talking about it. And I had them on our podcast earlier last year. So Lori's been a fantastic ally and friend in helping people and educating people on invisible labor.
Oh my goodness. That was lovely. Thank you. Well, Zach Watson, as everybody here knows, is a prolific voice in many social media environments, and he is representing what is the potential for the future of how men are involved in care and gender equity in the home. And I think it's enough to say that both of my boys follow Zach and watch everything he posts and bring it back to me as lessons that they've learned. And I think the size of his community, the amount that he engages with people, is a testament to his devotion to really having an impact where, let's be honest, like it's not the safest space for like a male voice all the time, and you come in so courageously to sort of represent your own evolution and it to honor the potential for other men and families and the wellness of families everywhere.
Thank you, Lori. So, why this matters? Why are we here today? And normally I would encourage the organizer, the person that might have hired us, to speak on this, but usually some of the things that are said are speaking to. This matters because it contributes to burnout in corporate settings every day. People are not getting hired. They're not getting paid for a lot of invisible labor because we don't always have great terminology to talk about the invisible labor going on in our organizations. It gets unnoticed and unappreciated and not hired because of. And so we're going to be going through a ton of examples today to try to outline what some of those things look like. We're going to be trying to kind of bring it to life, bring some new color, bring some new context to how we can talk about these conversations and bring the invisible to a place that's visible and improve the way that we're appreciating work across the board. In the even the larger scheme of things, I think we see consistently that women and moms specifically are shouldering so much more of this invisible labor when it comes to their homes versus with their partners. And that also shows up in the boardroom, in those meetings, and not having a flexible work environment to support women and moms that are paying the mom tax because they are not having the same opportunities that men are because they're expected to do the invisible labor at home. So there's the micro, there's the macro look at this, and I think when we bring this to corporate organizations, I love to bring a really objective experience of these words. I know that conversation, the macro of where it impacts homes at large, I think that can be really tough to swallow. I do think, however, being able to talk about it objectively in a corporate setting, in a setting that's not gendered, you're able to almost take a little bit of the sexism out of it. It is a significantly easier way to talk about it for all parties included, and people can feel heard in it. And then we can implant the language that improves on a significant level, like how much better we're able to have these conversations. To the point where I got a text from my friend Frank the other day to our group chat and said, "Hey guys, like I don't want to put too much emotional labor on you, but," and then he, asked for some advice. And it's like, that is the kind of work that I know I'm doing with my group of friends. And I think that kind of work, like when we have young men in our communities, when we have people that are willing, when it just becomes a normal part of their language to say emotional labor in a sentence, like that's when we know we're doing the work. And that's the purpose of this. Lori, is there anything you want to add?
I couldn't have said it better.
Okay. All right. So today we're going to be going through the invisible labor vocabulary. A huge part of this is really just simply getting these 5 terms kind of under wraps. If by the end of this session, we can have all 5 of these terms embedded in your lexicon, embedded in your ability to speak it out loud, that will be a win. And then you can go back into your organizations and start just dropping some of these words into your everyday that might turn heads, might not turn heads, but slowly but surely, just like I said, receiving that text from my friend Frank the other day, hearing him say this might be too much emotional labor, like literally brought me to tears. Not because I'm trying to get him to say it, but that is my constant goal, is getting people to have this be a normal part of how we talk. And the more normal it is, the less invisible that it is.
That's
So,
right.
physical domestic labor, clerical labor, gray work, cognitive labor, mental load, emotional labor, and culture keeping. Those are the ones that we're going to go through today. My encouragement for participation is to share examples in the chat. If I'm getting you guys to chat, I'm winning. And we'll also try to take some decision fatigue out of it. And we have some multiple choice questions that you guys can answer pretty easily. Physical domestic labor. And we're going to pull a moment from The Office. The way that we typically exemplify physical and domestic labor, cleaning a coffee pot in a microwave, fixing the background of your Zoom calls. Before we got on, Lori and I were chatting like, should I blur my background or not? Clearing out the community fridge if you guys have one. If you're on a team that it's fully remote and everyone is in their own spaces, the domestic labor is typically managing your coffee mugs, managing your workspace for if you have a roommate, if you have a partner that you share the home with, is making sure that your desk space is clean, refilling printer paper, maintaining, cleaning common spaces, organizing office supplies. And I hope you guys are got a couple office fans in the room. This is a great example of it. Can you guys hear that?
Do you see this?
Yes.
Disgusting. To whoever made the microwave mess, the microwave is a shared kitchen appliance. By not cleaning it up, you are basically telling whoever follows that their time is less valuable because they will have to scrub out your disgusting splatter. Sincerely, disappointed.
That is just obnoxious.
No kidding.
Yeah. Wait, what? The mess or the note?
No, so holier than thou.
I liked it. Don't you think the person who left the mess is the obnoxious one?
No, the note is way more obnoxious than the mess.
Sincerely disappointed. Get off your high horse, Richie.
Just because someone likes things clean doesn't mean they're rich.
They're rich.
Yeah, I wrote the note. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not proud of it. It is what it is.
Everyone keeps asking me if I wrote the note on the microwave. It was rude and condescending and a little snotty. I wish I had written it.
Hey, anonymous coward.
I'm going to pause it there, but I think you guys get the picture. So this is a really great example of just where domestic labor shows up in a workplace, where domestic labor shows up in the workplace, and what those conversations sometimes look like. Clearly, we saw from Andy and Oscar that domestic labor wasn't all that important to them. It was the speaking about it that was the more painful part. And so real quick, if you could write down in the chat, you can either put a number if one of these things speaks to you, like this is the painful part for you, like that's like the most domestic labor that you have to do within your job. Or if there's another example that you're thinking of that's like, oh, kind of fits this category, please put it in the chat.
And Zach, I thought you made a great point when you kind of connected folks who may work out of the home, the impact of that workspace to everyone else in the family and the domestic labor of taking responsibility for keeping that at a place where everyone feels comfortable and not sort of overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. And like I acknowledge like one of the things that I let get semi out of control in my little workspace here, because I'm in the in a main part of our home, is my tripods and my lighting tripod things. They get a little bit, they take up a bit more space than I promise they will. And so that's the domestic labor that I'm not quite doing enough of when it comes to domestic labor specifically for my workspace. Lori, which one of these is loudest for you, 1 through 6?
So, yeah, it's probably 6 because, again, this is my office, but it's also like a shared resource for the whole family. And so I'm the one that keeps track of making sure that all the supplies are in place. But, my kids use it for printing out assignments or whatever. And so we need to be communicating about who needs what, who's using what, when we're out of something. And so we've gotten into a flow of that, but it's intentional.
I'm going to give you guys 30 more seconds. My challenge and encouragement is write down the number 1 through 6 or share domestic labor, physical labor that you have to do within your job. And if you are a stay-at-home parent, if you're a stay-at-home mom, you can also write down all the things that it takes that effectively, like if a nanny had to take over your job, like what would be within that job. Great thing in my old company was that most things were done by an external company and the secretary was doing 6. But at home, I have to do kind of all of it. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Being the one who put on headphones when someone calls instead of it being blast to everyone. Amen to that. It's a good one.
So that is a great example of almost all of our kinds of labor. There's like emotional labor in that, right? There's that covers a lot of bases.
Great work. And feel free to keep answering those. We're going to go on to the next one. I'm going to hand it off to you, Lori.
Okay, super. I want to share a little bit about some examples of clerical work. So, clerical and gray work is really the labor that keeps the engines running, right? It's the behind the scenes support necessary to keep operations smooth. And if you haven't heard the term gray work, it specifically refers to this labor that bridges gaps left by broken or inefficient technology or systems. And so, it's a lot of fixing. And often these tasks are not formally recognized, rewarded, or even noticed. And you may even hear them referred to as non-promotable tasks, which is a bit of a sort of like a downer for something that's like really a lot of effort. But it's foundational work and the backbone of any business. And it's the work that really makes all other work possible. So you might find yourself carrying an invisible load of clerical tasks like these if, for example, especially with the tech stuff, colleagues will say to you, "You're so much better at this than the rest of us," or senior employees may often look to juniors thinking that they have excess capacity or that they're trying to prove themselves. Or maybe this kind of tasks are randomly allocated to people who just are known to say yes. And the risks when clerical work are invisible is first a feeling of overwhelm by the person who's carrying the load, feeling that their skills may be taken for granted, or it may be a compromise to their core work because they've taken on too much. And also, if this work isn't made visible, there's always a risk that multiple folks are trying to tackle it at the same time, leading to duplication, or that the task isn't being addressed at all because it wasn't actively assumed or assigned. So, for those of you who can relate to feeling this invisible load, boundaries can sometimes be hard to set. The takeaway here is not that we shouldn't or can't rely on our coworkers for support with clerical or gray work, but rather that there is power in noticing and valuing and acknowledging the impact of the contribution. Shall we watch our cute video here?
That's nice. For this one, though, I really need to stay locked in so I could weigh in on the rollout strategy. That's my piece of the project. So who else could grab notes this time? Okay, perfect.
So, a fantastic example of someone who's comfortable and maybe even rehearsed doing a little boundary setting because perhaps she has been exposed to this experience of being sort of taken advantage of, told you're better at this than the rest of us, kind of this made to feel more valuable, but it's not actually valued. And so she's kind of saying, actually, I've done this before. It's someone else's turn.
Absolutely love that example. And it shows, yeah, I think boundary setting is a great example of emotional labor as well.
Hmm.
Oop. And before we do that, again, I'm going to encourage you guys to either put in your own responses, but I would also encourage putting in 1 through 7. And just you can type in the number 1 through 7 to share like which one is the one that you do or is maybe the heaviest. I think for me, probably number 4 as an entrepreneur is probably the heaviest clerical labor that I hate doing. Maybe number 5 as well. A lot of 6 is kind of done. I just send scheduling links and people put themselves on my calendar and I set up my calendar so that I don't have to negotiate a lot of it. It's just people find their way on my calendar or they don't. But I would say, 4 and 5 are probably my heaviest. How about you, Lori?
I'm going to add actually a number 8, which is billing and expenses.
Yes.
That may be emotional and mental labor at times too, but obviously critical work, but definitely takes a lot of time. Jessica said something. One used to be the heaviest, but luckily AI is helping with that. Yes, that is very true. That's very true.
Yeah.
And so then it's a matter of,
There's one meeting I forgot to take notes for, came to the next meeting, and I was probably like half an hour before, and I realized I couldn't remember what the follow-up item had been that I was expecting of them. And so I was able to go back into the Zoom AI notes and get it pretty quickly.
I wonder, Jessica, if there's still sort of like a human element of having to like review them for accuracy, having to maybe distribute or follow up. But you're right. That is a big help with that load of work.
Yeah. See,
My old company.
I was done only for one group and it rotated. Otherwise, everyone was responsible for their own notes.
That's interesting.
Team lead 3 was done by sales, 4 by the engineers, 5 by me, 6 by everyone as needed, 7 I did once, but I'll never be doing that again. I did not know who does this. Otherwise, probably I love how you broke it down into the different like aspects of your organization that were doing those different clerical labors. That was really well put.
But what I love about that is that clearly the responsibilities were clear. So it wasn't necessarily invisible, and it was a cross functional team that had things allocated clearly, maybe by expertise or by capacity or whatever it was. But you knew who was doing what and that it was being done.
Let's see. All right. And feel free again to keep responding to that if you want to add more to it. Let's see. Next, cognitive labor, mental load. This is, if I didn't know how to explain this, you would have never heard of my name before. So, cognitive labor, mental load is, I typically think of it as left brain thinking. When I also, in contrast to it, domestic labor, you can just about always catch on camera it being done. If you had a hidden camera, a fly on the wall, they would see domestic physical labor being done. The closest you can usually do to someone doing cognitive labor is seeing them make those like looking off into the distance with their hand on their chin kind of look, maybe scratching their head. That's usually what cognitive labor looks like, and you might be able to catch on camera. I also would say when we look at different categories of jobs, something that's more blue collar, that's going to be a lot more physical labor versus people that are in an office, that are on a computer, a lot more clerical labor. And most of what they're doing in white collar work or at a desk is much more mental load, is much more cognitive labor. You're being hired for your brain more than your hands, maybe. And so I think that's another way to almost differentiate. So, and a huge part of the invisible aspect of it when it's not your day-to-day job. So remembering deadlines for someone else, which we're going to see in the clip from The Office, prompting follow-up for someone else, organizing and prompting teams' agendas, remembering narrative information of clients, being asked for information that can be looked up, referenced elsewhere. I was hired by a company specifically because two of the team members refused to do bullet point number 5. And so they hired me to help them see the pain that it was causing the rest of their team. 6, remembering a client likes to be called versus emailed during a certain time of day. Remembering for a colleague to send their time card. That was one that I was an offender of when I was in my last corporate job, is not putting in that information.
Question in the chat about what a time card is.
Time card is definitely a lot. Time cards are not what they used to be. When I used to work as a dishwasher, time card was literally the thing I would put in a little machine. It would punch what time I arrived, and then I would click it again it would say what time I left, so I knew how much to get paid. I'd say most corporate jobs, my experience with them in the last 10 years has been there's some kind of software that does payroll that you say what time you clocked in, what time you clocked out, the time you showed up, the time you left, so that it can calculate how much for you to get paid. I'm sure there's other ways that exists. People that are salaried typically don't have a time card, but if you're hourly, you have a time card. As consultants, we charge hours, so they also get used in that capacity. Gotcha.
Mhm.
Yeah. Or let's see. So I'm gonna roll the clip from The Office, and you guys, I'm gonna give you the same prompts. Read in 1 through 7 if those are the heavy ones for you, or add your own, add your 8. And say, what is that mental load for you? What is the cognitive labor that you're consistently doing that's a bit heavy?
Hey, John.
Screw you.
Excuse me. There's no way to address a superior.
It's you.
What was that all about?
You forgot her birthday. It was yesterday.
Go ahead. You do it. Okay. Assist. Basically, after Phyllis blackmailed Angela, Michael asked them both to step down from the party planning committee because there was too much drama.
What he said was
Easy.
there was a problem with having one head of the party planning committee. She becomes too powerful, so he appointed 2 heads.
Party planning? This is literally the stupidest
This is
thing ever done.
humiliating.
So what Jim and Dwight have just discovered is the heaviness of cognitive labor. And what we get to see in that moment, especially when we see Phyllis have that moment of like, you forgot her birthday, is we see clearly that she owns the cognitive labor of remembering birthdays and being a part of the trying to keep the culture cohesive and together and having people feel valued in that culture. So when you go to just change leadership, but the cognitive labor doesn't follow with the change in leadership, there's clearly a disconnect. So I thought this was a great clip for identifying the value of cognitive labor. And even thinking about when I was in sales, I remember there were moments where I was an account manager and I had to hand over an account to someone else. And knowing like, hey, don't talk to this person, but talk to this person and call them instead of emailing them. And I remember having to hand over so many accounts that I was like, I I don't know how much this information that you would like me to hand over to, but I know a lot of it's valuable. And while some things end up in notes, some things don't, and that is what can make jobs heavy and handing off hard. I'm going to prompt one more time because I know we got there were two responses, but I'd love to hear what is the heavy cognitive labor for you in your job and or that you've seen for other people. I'll say for myself, I would say number 4 is probably some of the heaviest. I am always like when I'm on coaching calls and I'm talking with people, it's definitely the people that I see on a more recurring basis that I almost don't have to remember. It just kind of comes with it. But if I'm meeting with them once or twice, or I run office hours, and so people can show up whenever they want within my community, when they show up, remembering their information versus like having to pull it up on my notes section for that person. Those are very different experiences. So I would say number 4 is pretty tough for me. I think that's probably the one for me specifically on this list.
Hey, Zach, you gave a beautiful like image up front of how the fly on the wall would not really be able to see cognitive and mental load, but you also have a great example of what it looks like from the inside out, like what it looks like inside my brain, like all the tabs open and all that you often share.
Totally. I'm glad you brought that up. So up at the top of the screen, you may see the tabs. So this is a screenshot of my Chrome tabs a couple weeks ago. Effectively, when I look at the Chrome tabs on my computer, most of the time they're a to-do. I don't close out of something. If I need to do something, if I need to reference it again, if I don't have a bookmark, but it's like it's not quite important enough that it deserves a bookmark on my list. And so sometimes we have tons of tabs open. I think that is what my brain feels like often. And I think, like you said, Lori, I think is a great visual for describing what that feels like sometimes.
So relatable. Especially, I'm guessing everybody with us today is nodding their heads to that one.
And Lori, which one of these for you would you say is some of the heavier cognitive labor, or what's your number 8?
So I think a lot of following up, reminding, knowing, we work with so many other people, be it clients or colleagues or whatever, like knowing other people's wiring around timeliness or remembering commitments or whatever, and sort of being the one, because I'm wired as someone for whom that isn't a tricky challenge, and really carrying the load of always being the reminder, the organizer, the executor of that.
I'm going to prompt you guys one more time. I would love to see what you guys are seeing for cognitive labor within your job, because this is like, if we can identify this well, this can absolutely create culture change within your departments when you can start defining, labeling cognitive labor in your everyday.
And also the recognition that we all have a different capacity for this kind of work, and there isn't only one right way of doing it. So if someone else could get access to a tool that makes this easier for them, then maybe they can participate more.
I'll give you guys 10 more seconds and then we'll jump to the next one.
Hey. Emotional labor. Emotional labor is the work of identifying, managing, and adapting one's own emotions to positively affect the feelings of others, often to meet the demands of a job or a social expectation. So basically, it's a bit of an editing of the expression of your own emotions to protect those of someone else. And this is beautiful work. This is essential for social and economic thriving. It's a vital component of both our professional and personal lives. It's driven by empathy and care and requires emotional regulation, called often the work of the heart. It's not just a soft skill, it's a core leadership competency. Communication, appreciation, respect, and empathy are all forms of emotional labor. Where it can take a toll is when it goes unrecognized or is imbalanced, expected of some and not of others. And this is really where we have the opportunity to evolve. So, as I kind of just referenced on the last slide, We have to acknowledge we're all wired differently for this. Not everyone tunes into others' emotions as naturally. And for some, it's even challenging to connect with your own at times. So don't be afraid to identify this as an opportunity that you want to work on. It's really an important skill. And if organizations give emotional labor value, it can really impact culture, especially with remote work teams. The work of the heart is really important. It helps with team chemistry and so much more. And after today, I have a feeling a lot of you will start noticing and seeing yourselves doing this emotional labor.
Shall I roll a clip?
Roll.
So I had a couple of ideas to make the Stanford people feel more at home. Each year we have a Christmas raffle.
It would never work here.
Okay. Another idea was karaoke.
No.
Got into a couple of other inappropriate ones, but what I think is a great highlight here is just the work that Karen does to deal with the way that Angela is speaking to her. We can see it on her face. I can even the way that they filmed it, they zoom in on her face just a little bit as she's like coming to terms with that moment. I think is a really great example of the emotional labor that we do so that we're being appropriate in the workplace. And I will prompt you guys as normal now, 1 through 7. Which are the heaviest ones that you are experiencing? And Lori, maybe kick to you. What is some of the heaviest one for you?
I'm a big heart person, and so I connect with every single one of these. I see myself in every one of these examples. And to be honest, this is work that I'm proud to do. Also, emotional labor is recognizing when it isn't a core competency for someone else and supporting them through it or into it or beyond it. I love this work, but like any other invisible labor, it always feels better when it's recognized.
It's interesting. I'm thinking about there's a lot of these that I both do and do, but I think the reason that people have found me on the internet is because I've been willing to do the emotional labor of taking potentially not great moments in my own home and creating a palatable storytelling version of it so that people can see themselves in it. I mean, even thinking about like number 5 is effectively what I do on social media, which is speaking mostly with a lot of men that I think I'm hoping will understand if I put it in just the right words. And I'm going to try a couple thousand times before I'm done with this career to try to put it in a way that is going to reach them. And it's going to be an uncomfortable message that they can do better.
Yeah, vulnerability is a really great example. And also all the framing and reframing and care that you take in creating and crafting the message so that it is received and processed is really meaningful, but that's so impactful.
Renita, I would love to know. I know you said 7, all 7.
All 7.
What is the most painful one? Or like if you could offload, like the first one, if you could offload it to someone else, what's the first one that you would offload? And same question to Lola, Jessica, and Bethany. Love to hear what are those ones that you would love to offload, you would love to no longer have to do that emotional labor, and or even just being able to say next time that one of these comes up in your day-to-day, being able to say, I'm not ready to do that emotional labor. And I feel like all the time when I'm talking with Alyssa, my wife, when I'm talking with someone else and saying, oh, I am not ready to do the emotional labor, a lot of couples come to me and they're in crisis, and those calls are the toughest when they're on the brink of divorce, when talking about divorce, like playing referee between the two of them and having them pause and being like, okay, wait, I want this person to talk now about this thing. That is the heaviest emotional labor that is not fun, but a requirement of my job. As a queer
Renita, thank you for sharing that. It's really meaningful to hear that.
If you could elaborate, I would love to hear more about that. And or if you'd like to come off camera, I would love to hear you share more about that. No pressure though.
Yeah, no, I can share. I just think that like when you talking about like the emotional labor that you carry inside of your workplace, I think it's hard to separate identity from emotional labor. And so like that's why I pointed out like my identity when you asked me if I like had to pick one that I absolutely like had to choose to offload. And I think just really holding back the fear of judgment is really because one of the topics that I like to talk to my students and staff about is really just about the biases that we carry that we don't even recognize that we carry. And because I do so much work to try to eliminate biases in my own personal life, and I hope that that reflects in my work life, I know that many people don't have that skill mastered. And so as a young professional that tends to be very outspoken and boisterous and really want to share my ideas, thoughts, and feelings, I think and I think the other identity that I'll add in there is young professional, because sometimes you feel like your voice isn't heard. And I think just that, that then tends to feed out into me holding back my emotions out of fear of judgment if something is really hard to talk about or really affecting me and things like that. And just being a professional in diversity, equity, and inclusion, you feel that even more, especially during this time. It's just 10 times of a greater feel. You always have to walk on eggshells. And so just my fear of judgment is real. Even going out into the public and things, and people are like, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" I stutter sometimes because you just never know what kind of response or feedback that you're gonna get. And so it's just always, that's a big one for me. I definitely feel all seven, but I feel two just really it stands out to me the most.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That is absolutely a point that we need to add to this presentation. So meaningful to hear your experience. Really appreciate you being open about that.
Yes, thank y'all for giving me the space to share.
Absolutely. I'm honored coming, from that, seeing myself, right, as a super privileged white male. I looked through all of the checkboxes. I know that there are very few privileges and I'm also tall, but I'm all of the boxes. So I know that there's a lot that I consistently don't understand because I haven't had to experience it. And it takes being able to hear enough stories for me to wrap my head around things. So thank you for educating me today. Let's see. Consistent prompt is, I would still love to hear other people's sharing of emotional labor. Otherwise, I'll give you guys another 15 seconds or so, and then we'll go to the next one.
Just also to reiterate the uniqueness of all of those examples in remote work. We've all adapted to how to connect with one another, how to read one another, how to respond to one another when we're not around the same table or having lunch together or whatever we used to have in the workplace. And really, we have to be even more mindful about how we're showing up for our coworkers and connecting with them and remembering birthdays and things like that to keep our culture thriving.
And it's interesting, Renita, you brought up the term walking on eggshells, which in itself is managing your emotions so that it doesn't impact other people. And I was thinking about yesterday, I was talking with a contractor that we're looking at hiring to do some work here. And he's called me 3 times. I've been busy in the times that he's called. So I haven't picked up. And I bumped into him yesterday and he's like, "Yeah, I've been trying to call you." I was like, "What? Why didn't you just send a text? Why didn't you just send an email?" I said, "Well, I had a couple questions." And so I asked, "Hey, have you tried voice notes before?" And I was like, "I'm betting that you called me because you wanted to make sure that your tone was appropriately conveyed in your messaging. And so you probably didn't want to send a text because you didn't want something to come off harsh. You wanted to make sure that the emotional labor that you were putting into the message was getting translated in the reception of it." And so when I educated him on how to send a voice note, meanwhile, he's like, "Yeah, I just learned about Google Docs last month." So he's clearly in a different state of mind. Either way, I thought that was a good example of he probably would have been walking on eggshells around me if he had left a text and wasn't sure how it had been received if I responded via text. All right. So I know we're 3 minutes away from the original time that we had set. Oftentimes when we do ERG groups, when we do corporate talks, they usually go for an hour, but I wanted to keep it somewhat succinct for today's kind of lunch and learn. We might go over by a little bit. Let me know in the chat if you need to jump right at the 45 mark, but we'll probably go over at least a little bit. So
we do have some great tips at the end.
Yeah. The last of the terms is culture keeping. So When we look at families, one of the set of parallel words is kin keeping, which I'm not sure if anyone's heard of on this call. Culture keeping is effectively doing the work to keep the glue together. And the party planning committee, literally, that's their entire job, is keeping the culture and making sure that people feel valued, people feel celebrated when celebration's appropriate, that they're celebrating different holidays, that they're bonding together. So culture keeping is effectively all of that invisible labor put together, and it's often not paid. So doing the planning of team birthdays, events, mending relationships between team members, keeping track of personal events for colleagues, participating in volunteer events, office events, updating clients on life events and or illness. Any and all of these things I think are super valuable for keeping good culture. Even, I'm looking at hiring some of my first couple of employees and being able to check in with them about, hey, I know your whole family was sick last week. How are you guys doing? That's both emotionally, but more important from a leadership standpoint, I think that it's culture keeping too. So yes, it's to keep a positive relationship with me and him, that he feels heard and, the struggles that him and his family are going through right now. And from a culture standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, making sure that his situation is felt and heard within this culture, and that I'm not putting their work responsibilities ahead of their personal experience. I think culture keeping is probably what made some of my jobs great and what made some of my jobs not as great. And I think you can tell that when you just see random baked goods in the lunchroom and there's no feeling behind it, they just seem to be plopped there. You can feel the difference in the emotional labor that's put into some of those things. I think that a lot of people almost take some of the value out of the culture keeping. The emotional labor is taken out when they think of it as like, we'll bring snacks to an event. We'll put food in the coffee room or something. That is like an example that calls out to me, where it's like almost poorly done culture keeping, that they're almost kind of checking a box with some calories. I've seen that done in a handful of my organizations I've been a part of.
Zach, also, you touched on this at the beginning, but I think this example in particular is one of the examples of invisible labor that has been particularly feminized. I think in a lot of work environments, a lot of these things are expected of women primarily. And I would love for this to shift, not only so that we can see what men are capable of, but so that men can feel the value in these contributions. These often have that immediate feedback loop, right, of culture keeping and all the beautiful examples that you used.
And I will say one of the parts that I love about this might be a little bit of a flex on my part, but when I was in my sales role a couple of years ago, we had a keg in our office, which wasn't great for my health. However, it was a really useful tool that I'd be like, oh, do you guys want to grab a drink and talk? And I think there's a lot more networking that probably happened in that job. I was the one, especially when we had a couple of team members that, we had a hybrid remote office, so no one had assigned desks. And so people would camp out in like random parts of the floor. So I was the one hiking through the cubicles, like trying to find the team member that was like a recluse and bring them over to invite them to have drinks with us at the end. The other thing that I did was I created a separate Slack. In sales, it can be kind of a lonely job, especially when you're making cold calls all day. And so we made a separate Slack to help us do the culture keeping of people that wanted to be high performers. And so we created an emoji language to communicate what was happening for us, so we could share the joy or the challenge of the emotions throughout the day in sales without overwhelming everyone with Slack messages. So that was something I actually really enjoyed and like put a lot of effort into. That it took me a while to identify that was some of the work that I was doing in that job. Lori, I'll kick to you. What are some of those ones that are really heavy for you and or you've done before? And to everyone in the room, I'd love to hear. I recognize I did not put numbers on this one, but I'd love to hear what's the culture keeping that you do in your work.
So in my current business, I am the one employee. So I definitely am the culture keeper and all the things. But in my previous roles in corporate, definitely I was a part of the gathering, the connecting, the ordering of dinner if we were working late, the offsite planning, and all of that. It comes naturally to me. I wanted to make sure everybody was included and enjoyed, but it's a ton of work. and often non-promotable. It's really that extra layer that you take on because you're the right person or you're the yes person, not necessarily because you have excess capacity, but because you're willing.
I'll give you guys about 30 seconds. I'd really love to hear from people. Feel free to come off mute. Feel free to put in the chat. I know there's 5 different things there. If you want to put a 1 through 5, I'd love to hear it. And then we'll go to our slightly next section. I know you'll get responses over there. I know a couple of you might be actually eating lunch, so I was a lunch and learn. All right. Feel free to still respond. I have no to the line. So what's opening up here? And just to break down the fourth wall for a second for people that might want to have this in their own ERG, in their own workplace. This is where I really aim to create some magic. There have been a couple different experiences I've had where the person that hired me, the team leader that wanted me to speak, really wanted a couple people specifically to see some certain invisible labor that was either getting neglected on one side of the team or that they were able to see for themselves and so that they weren't burning out. So really what my intention in this last aspect, once we now have vocabulary, we've gotten people to participate a little bit, a huge part of what we're trying to do here is speak to it and identify it and have them feel heard and or hear other people. And my favorite side is in 3 from now is having people be vulnerable and acknowledge where they've had an invisible labor for other people, which is both so heartfelt, so kind of warming, but like creating a safe space is the really hard part, I think, of the beginning of the presentation so that people can open up and share those kind of things. Huge goal here. I would encourage, what is opening up for you? I know that if any of you have followed me for some amount of time, you've heard me probably talk about some of these things ad nauseum already before this call. But I would love to know, what are some things you might disagree with? What are some of the things that are opening up for you that you had not considered to be labor before? And or what are the new definitions that maybe you hadn't considered before? And if I don't hear anything, we'll move on in about 20 seconds. So I will go to the next one, which is I encourage people here to share what are the top 3 heaviest things of each kind of labor. And this is where I like to workshop it when I can, and have people try to identify more things. I think we're going to skip over that because I've prompted the heck out of you guys, and I appreciate the participation that you put in, but I do want to try to finish up. So here's the last one that I am going to hold on for a bit longer is, what is some of the invisible labor that you've added for your colleagues? I would say for myself, when I was in a corporate setting, when I was in sales, I know for sure there were probably a dozen moments over 2 years where I did not put in my time card on a Friday. And I got a message from my manager on Monday morning saying, hey, do you want to get paid? You got to put in your hours, man. We can't pay you if you don't put in the numbers appropriately. And there was the paychecks that actually got skipped because I didn't send it in on time. I would say another aspect is there were a lot of moments where I had not considered that people were doing work for me when I was a teacher. And whenever I would start a new job, I was at 5 different schools. People were assigned to be mentors. And so they kind of would come chase me down, check in with me and do some of the emotional labor to make sure that I was kind of fitting into the culture. Those were some huge aspects that I didn't realize, that the chasing down of me in those roles and getting me to open up about where I was challenged with. I didn't necessarily see that as invisible labor that people were doing for me, but looking back, I really appreciate it. Lori, is there anything that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think early in my corporate career, probably I could have done a much better job of sharing emotions, concerns, questions at an earlier time in a process rather than letting them grow and build and become more overwhelming and affect than the way that I showed up in a project. And I think that's something that comes with maturity or with experience or with comfort in a role and comfort with your coworkers. But looking back now, I definitely held a lot in, which I'm sure other people could feel.
I'm really gonna push you guys. I really want to see who is willing to acknowledge some of the invisible labor they put on some of their colleagues. You guys at least 30 seconds. And again, I know this is a little bit more thoughtful, so feel free to come off mute. You don't even have to raise your hand. I think we have a small enough group here. I'd love to hear if someone would be willing to share.
one just as we're letting people think. And this is like it's kind of a weird one. I don't know how to categorize it, but I had, when I was really young in my career and like paying off student loans and trying to save for my first apartment, I had a boss who would always ask me to borrow money and he never paid me back. And it was the weirdest situation. Like I felt obligated to always like give him what he needed, like for lunch or for coffee or whatever. It was not huge amounts of money, but I was never able to sort of express the discomfort or the wish that he would actually ever like pay me. I mean, I was struggling to like pay off this, pay off that, and save whatever. And it was just so he had no idea of the impact that he was having by repeatedly asking me for 20 bucks, 20 bucks, 20 bucks, 20 bucks. And as a young person who was trying to thrive in his group, I just never said anything about it. That's a unique example, I bet.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard anything quite like that. Yeah, no, there are definitely conversations of like going out to eat, and I would do the emotional nerve saying, "Hey, I'm trying to save right now. I'd love to come with you guys. Do you mind if I just like ride along to talk? But I'm not going to order anything that might feel a little weird for you guys." And every once in a while, there would be a say, "Hey, just I'll pay for your lunch." And but I really tried to not ask that of them because I wanted to socially participate without the financial participation, which could have potentially, even by saying that, that could have created emotional labor of like they felt uncomfortable that they were having, using their money a certain way and differently than me. All right, I'm gonna give you guys another 15 seconds. I'd really love to hear if you guys are willing to be vulnerable. And I know it's a big ask.
This is a hard one for me because I don't really know how to like really the examples that y'all gave were like bomb. Like those are really good examples. That's something that's like outside of the box that I wouldn't necessarily have thought about with some invisible labor a colleague because it's just like yeah. I would say that like the closest thing, and you could correct me if I'm wrong about this example, whether or not it will fit, but I feel like the closest thing that I would say is like when I'm frustrated at like higher up administratives or whatever, I'll like go to like people who are maybe in close proximity to them and be like, like, do you really think that this person like meant that action? Or like, do you think that like it was intentional? Or whatever. And I think that like maybe that's invisible labor because it's like putting them in a tough position to try to kind of like determine how to like solve a problem for me almost. I don't know, like that's the closest. Yeah, yeah,
Label
yeah.
it for you. I'm gonna
Yeah.
guide you through it. I want you to use some of that language. What is the emotional labor? I'm gonna just said it. What is the labor that you're inviting them to do for you by asking that question?
Um,
Because you're absolutely right. This is definitely invisible.
I would say emotional labor and maybe keeping culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even thought of culture keeping, but yeah, I think whenever you're inviting someone like, hey, I know all the time I'll go up to Alyssa, hey, can I regulate some joy with you? Like I literally can't focus because I have too much joy, something just happened. Or I might come to her, hey, I just had a tough call. Like, can I vent with you for a minute? That is me effectively saying, hey, will you do the emotional labor of holding safe space for me to be able to speak, um, hear me out, maybe not disagree with me, or sometimes it is helping to solve a problem. So if it's like solving a problem, like, hey, I need help solving this problem, probably more cognitive labor. If it's venting, if it's emotional, if it's more emotional regulation, I'd probably call that emotional labor. If you're asking someone to, I think that those are the main two things that I hear in the example I shared.
That's a brilliant example, Renita. Thank you so much for all your engagement and contribution today. We actually hadn't covered that directly. And, this is something that I think we should add to our slide where we talk about what leadership can do really, because it is incumbent upon leadership to create
Are you ready?
spaces for people to, be able to share troubles or
Do they want to
they're
do
having.
Google whatever or?
Thanks so much, Renita.
I'm going to finish my one I go in.
Thank you. I love that ad. I think that's a brilliant example.
Yeah, thank you, Renita, for being willing to be vulnerable there. And so the last thing I'll send you off with, I know it's 2:00, is how can we introduce these concepts on our team? The real basics are start using these 5 words, or I know there's a couple more words you added in there, but try to start using these 5 words in your everyday language. So if you're saying, hey, thanks for the emotional labor, sounds like you carry a lot of their mental load. Is my favorite one. Whenever I get the DM question, how do I explain mental load to my husband? I usually say, hey, it's going to take some emotional labor because you're doing some labeling and some extra work. But if you can have them, when they're sharing about their work day, acknowledging where they're holding mental load or cognitive labor for their colleagues. I really appreciate the culture keeping you're doing. Hey, sorry I haven't been a safe space for you to share. The great work is going to take more time than we think. Literally just using these words in your everyday forces people to contend with, what does this mean? What are they asking of me? Wait a second, what was the word they just used? And they can start identifying, like, I think, Renita, in your example, if after they finished kind of venting with you or helping you solve it, hey, thanks for helping me deal with this mental, and thank you for the emotional labor. I really appreciate it. When we start treating this invisible labor like something that is a valuable resource that is worth speaking of, then we can start to change culture. And I come back to the example of my friend Frank saying, hey, this might be too much emotional labor to put on you guys. And then Lori, I'm going to kick to you for I think this will probably be our final item.
Let me do it quickly because I think some of the examples are really important. So I have some examples for employees and then some examples for leadership. So how do we make invisible work visible and valued? Well, number one, document it. Keep a little sort of journal of the things that you've done that maybe you think haven't been seen. Advocate for it with good energy and in real time. So an example is like, hey, just flagging I spent time on XXX this week so that the team could move forward. I'd really appreciate if that could be recognized. Add it into performance reviews, specifically linked to company goals, or even convert it into official work or something that's documented in a role. Things that leadership, next slide, can do. First of all, reinforce that all tasks are valued and impactful. Revisit job descriptions with employees and officially add invisible work details in. Maybe even allocate the first 5 minutes of meetings to reporting on that which may not have been seen, and everybody gets 1 minute to go around. And then leaders have to model taking on some of this labor so that the load is clearly carried across all levels. Finally, maybe even creating incentives around recognition of sharing invisible labor so that we can remove this notion of non-promotable tasks and value all contributions in the workplace and to our teams.
Really great. Feeling a little guilt. I know that we are now 18 minutes over, but I appreciate y'all sticking around with us. So this is the last thing I do is I just give sort of a reminder of people including it in to their everyday lives. And this is the majority of the presentation. I usually open it up kind of for Q&A around here. Oftentimes the ERG workshops will be 60 or 90 minutes so that we can have some more time to talk at the end. But again, thank you all for coming. I'll be sending follow-ups, especially with all 4 of you, to see what this is like for you. If this is something you would want to have in your organization. I really appreciate your time here and your participation. I hope you got something out of it. I would love to hear what this experience was like for you. I do got to jump to another meeting, but this was really fantastic.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank y'all for your time.
Appreciate you, Renita.
All right.
Want to catch up later?